Most people think it's impossible to escape North Korea, but two men proved it was possible after their miraculous escape using just 3 key items: a bike tire, a pump, and a backpack. Chul Un-lee was a high-ranking North Korean government official who lived in the South Hwanggi province. A couple days prior to his escape attempt, Lee was surveying land for his government job on the coast along the Yellow Sea. There's landmines and electric fences scattered all throughout the region, preventing North Koreans from trying to escape through the sea, so Lee was trying to mentally record where all the landmines and fences were. Lee told nobody that he was going to try and escape North Korea, not even his family, but he did recruit one of his most physically fit friends to join him on the journey. Lee and his friend drove to the edge of where North Koreans were legally able to access with their bike tire, pump, and backpacks. They started crawling through the high grass towards the sea. It was a full moon, so if they stood up, they definitely would have been seen by the patrols guarding the land. Lee and his friend agreed that if the friend would lead the way to test for landmines, Lee would be the first to test the electric fence. Thankfully, no landmines went off and the electric fence wasn't on at the time, as electricity in North Korea is very sparse, so now Lee and his friend were gonna have to make a run for it, as the long grass was about to end and there was still about 100 yards to the sea. It was initially too bright to make the sprint, so they waited for a big cloud to eventually cover the light radiating off the moon. The cloud was finally in place and the men decided to make a run for it into the sea. Once reaching the water, the goal was to inflate the bike tire with the pump to make floating in the sea much easier, but to their surprise, the pump wasn't working, so they ditched the pump and the tire and they made their way out into the Yellow Sea. 2 hours into swimming, the men were getting exhausted, so in order to make themselves lighter, they ditched their backpacks full of food and even stripped off their clothes, leaving just their boxers on in order to be as light as possible. Now, 3 to 4 hours into the swim, Lee's friend told him that he couldn't do it anymore, but Lee wasn't gonna let him give up. Most people think it's impossible to escape North Korea, but two men proved it is possible in one of the most death-defying stunts you've ever heard, using just a bike tube, a pump, and a backpack. In the last video I posted part 1 to this story, so just to recap, a man named Chul Un-lee got his friend to try and escape North Korea with him by swimming out into the Yellow Sea in hopes to cross the maritime border and make it back onto land in South Korea where they'd be free. They brought a bike tube with them to try and use as a raft, but they were unable to inflate it once they made it onto the water, so they had to ditch it and then start swimming. 2 hours into the swim, the men stripped off their clothes in order to swim easier, and 3 to 4 hours into the swim, Lee's friend was about to give up because of the insane cramps he was having in his legs, essentially paralyzing him. Lee wasn't gonna let his friend drown, so he swam with one hand, while with the other, he was massaging his friend's leg to ease the cramps. Suddenly, the men saw a boat coming towards them, and they assumed it belonged to North Korea. In a panic, the men saw a small island roughly 300 yards away, and frantically started swimming towards it. They made it onto the island, and the boat didn't seem like it was coming any closer, so they hid here until the boat would leave. As they were soaked and only in their boxers on a cool September night, the men were absolutely freezing, but they used some trash that washed up on shore to cover themselves overnight. In the morning, the men walked back to the water to begin swimming, but were honestly too afraid, so they found some styrofoam and wood on the island and attached it all to construct a makeshift raft. They made it back into the water with this raft and started paddling with their hands towards South Korea. Suddenly, another boat started coming towards them, and they couldn't tell which country the ship belonged to. At this point, they wouldn't have enough speed to get away, so they waited to see who was approaching, and sure enough, it was the South Koreans who had been tracking them since the previous night. The men made it on board and were brought back to land, proving it is possible to